My name is JD at Goat District on the Twitter machine. Welcome to Shark Week Part 1 here on the Goat District Network. We tell you every week, guys, this is where winners hang. And the next 7 days, we bring you 3 fantasy football sharks. You can even call these guys whales with the amount of money they've brought down. They will share their secrets, how to win the big money in the big leagues. Grab your pen and paper. Grab a cold one, guys, because we're going to dig deep into the mind of these guys, and they're going to share their secrets, their tips, and all the goodness. Let's get to it.
District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? Welcome back to the Goat District. Like I said, week 1 of Shark Week, and we have our shark hunter right below me. He's got his harpoon in hand. And buddy, you pulled in tonight's guest, so I'm going to go to you first. Theo, tell us how you're doing and how pumped are you for tonight?
I mean, I'm super stoked. We have 2 guys that I consider 2 of the sharper minds in fantasy football right now, and 2 guys I really like personally. Back-to-back nights of the Goat District. So I'm very excited. For tonight to get it started with Shark Week. We have three shows in 7 days, and then I have probably the most difficult draft I'll have of the season on Friday night with Dan, and our guest Abib as well. So it's just an awesome week for football. Feels like the gears are going, and I'm ready to get it started.
For sure, man. And Dan was so hyped for tonight that he was deep in a cave looking for gold, and he couldn't find any coins, but he's with us, man. He's with us in spirit and in voice. Dan, how you doing, brother?
Wait, I think I got this camera thing down.
Nice, there he is.
It's the big reveal.
Is that a haircut or a man bun?
That is a haircut.
Oh, look at that.
That is a nice haircut.
The flow is gone. I like it.
I had to keep up with Theo, so I went with the Theo.
There you go. I love it. I love it.
So, guys, let's not waste any more time.
No.
As good as Dan looks with the fresh cut, and yes, I'm jealous because I got nothing to cut myself. But, guys, tonight's guest, I don't want to mess up. Abib Agbetoba, 2-time FFPC champion, and life-changing money. One show I watch in crypto, they call it wife-changing money. Welcome to the Goat District, brother. We are so pumped to have you tonight.
Oh, dude, thanks for having me. And just, to start off, I got to say, I don't think anyone, including myself, has ever pronounced my last name as well as you did. So kudos to you.
Man, I finally got one.
You have no idea what an accomplishment this is for JD. These are habitual words.
Oh, man, it's awesome that you take the time to hang with us tonight and talk fantasy. And I had to cut you off because Theo started picking your brain a bit before we got onto the recording. And I was like, no, we got to keep this for the peeps, man. We got to share the goodness. So we appreciate you tonight. And we'll just start off by letting the people know where they can find you out there on Twitter land, any social media, and just give us a little background on Abib the man.
So I am on Twitter. I think it's Skywalker 2000, SKYWALKA 2000. And you can also find me and my co-host for the new pod/show that we just got up and running, First and 15th. So the number 1 ST and then the ampersand 15, I believe. If not, follow me and we'll figure it out from there. I'm terrible at these things, but I guess a little bit about me. Someone who just loves to watch football. I have a very competitive nature and spirit. I'm no longer allowed to play Monopoly with my family on vacation, So, I mean, to kind of give you a sense of how competitive I am. But yeah, I mean, it all started in undergrad with a group of buddies. I was asked to join a fantasy football league. And I think at the time I really, maybe I watched the Oilers or the Texans here and there. But for the most part, I was, basketball was my sport. It's a sport that I love to play, and a sport that I, felt, the most comfortable with from a fantasy standpoint or just from an analysis standpoint. But as you guys know, when you're in these home leagues, especially in leagues where with close friends, and you lose, you tend to hear about it over and over and over again. And this, the just trash talk in these leagues was just on an entirely another level. So I had no choice but to get better. So I dug in. I started doing research at the time, buying fantasy magazines and trying to watch as much football as I could. And I just, at some point just figured out that, man, I actually love watching football. Like, I love to sit down and watch football. We were talking about it off air, but it is really an art form. All the different aspects of the game, both on the offensive end, the defensive end, the coaching schemes. There's just so much in it. And it's really hard to try and, pick out things here or there. I mean, you can watch a game 3 or 4 times over and over, and each time you watch it, there's something new. So I just love that aspect of it. There's so many variables that are in play. So it's really something that's hard to become an expert on. And that's a term that I try not to apply to myself because I feel like there's so much learning that goes in. I'm still learning to this day, and I love that process. So I found out that I really fell in love with the game of football itself, and then from there it just kind of exploded. And so I went from losing my leagues or my home league, particularly this big league, to winning a few championships, getting the trophy, and that felt good. And so I got to a point where I was, for the most part, always competing, but I was spending so much time and so much effort in trying to win these home leagues that I was like, I got to somehow get a better return on investment with the amount of time that I'm spending watching football and doing analysis. So a few years back, I want to say 2019 was when I first started to really delve into to high stakes leagues, particularly the FFPC, and I've done some drafts in the NFFC as well, and then it just took off from there.
So before I pass it over to Theo to dive a little deeper, just what's the starting point for you? You're kind of jumping from, because I think we've all that's how we get to the FFPC. You know what I mean? Our friends maybe don't take it as serious as we do. Once we beat them, they move on. They don't want to figure out how to beat us. Yeah. So we want to step up, and like you said, that ROI becomes important. So what does Abib do when he first lands on the FFPC? How does he start that trek to the big money?
Oh man, so I think the first step, you fall and plummet and fall flat on your face. I think, actually, I want to say my first year was 2018, and I had about 2 or 3 teams. And I went back and looked at those teams a couple of days ago, and oh my God, I mean, it's you really have to understand the format, and that takes some time. You have to sort of kind of understand the league itself and the size of the league, it being 20 players deep, understanding the waiver wire process. So there's just a lot of learning that goes into just understanding the format and league setup. all the other analysis and, picking the right players is almost secondary until you get that first, till you get that down first. So that 2018, I think I had 2 or 3 teams and none of them made the playoffs. None of them cashed. And again, kind of getting back to the competitive nature that I have, I felt like, at least that I was able to gain some experience in what a tight end premium league is about, what high stakes is about, how to sort of tackle and draft a team that can compete for a 3-week period to really try and become the leader of that final tournament. And I don't have all the answers, but I think it was just a learning process, and I tried to learn as quickly as possible. So I really spent a lot of time studying how to attack that particular format, and I think that's how you should do with any league.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious, when do you start your process? Like, have you started drafting leagues already, or will you, at what point will you start? I know you're going to be drafting a league on Friday for sure.
Yeah.
But we want to know how degenerate you are. That's basically
that's what we're trying to drive at.
How much time you got now? So it feels like my process starts earlier and earlier every year. I think at this point last year, I really wasn't doing much drafting. I was really starting to, dive into research, and I like to create a very, a nice foundation of knowledge and analysis and have a good understanding of players and new situations, et cetera. This year, that process started immediately after the draft. So not a huge, or I didn't have much of an off season per se, but I think there's an advantage in starting the process a little bit earlier, just like with anything. And that's probably common sense, but my next sort of phase in, tackling fantasy football or trying to improve is really diving into dynasty and the collegiate level. So the reason that I started earlier is because I needed a better grasp on the rookie players going into 2021. I felt like last year, for me, it wasn't the rookies coming in weren't a huge impact. So I was sort of learning along the way. This year, I think they're going to have a significant impact, whether it's a player that you want to draft or whether it's a player on that team. And it doesn't need to even be a player at the same position. It could be a running back that may affect a wide receiver, or, a wide receiver that may affect a quarterback, et cetera. So I wanted to start that process a little bit earlier. And, and each year I just pick up something new and spend a lot of time this year just watching film of college players, because I'm not really huge into college football. So that took a lot of time. And as far as getting to your question in terms of am I drafting? Yes, I've been drafting. Yes.
Good deal. Are you putting in football guys leagues already, or are you doing best balls, or what kind of drafts are you doing right now?
I've done a handful of best balls. For the most part, I am doing the football guys. There's just no better. For me, there's no better way to prepare than just to dive in. Obviously, again, I want to dive in with the foundation, but I found it, for me personally, I can do as many best balls as I want. It's not until I really start that first draft or get in that first league before I really feel like, okay, kind of getting a grasp on things. Because, when you're drafting 20 rounds, there's a lot that goes on in 20 rounds. A lot of players that you have to kind of think about. There's a lot of analysis that goes into, how you want to construct your team. And it takes a few drafts to really figure that out. And, I'm hopeful that I get there a little bit sooner rather than later. But, yeah, for me, I'd rather just jump right in.
To piggyback off Dan's question, the 2 winning entries, your back-to-back champions, when was were they done in August, July, or were they closer to the season?
The 2019 team is tough. I would say that it was closer to the season. I want to say it was that year I drafted 15 teams. I want to say it was it was either my 9th or 5th team, so it would have been somewhere mid to late process. And that year, that was a good year. 12 of those teams ended up making it, cashing or placing and making it to that final tournament. And then last year, I went a little overboard. COVID, there wasn't much to do, so I think
Thank God you did, right?
I killed time by drafting. So last year I drafted 67 teams. Yeah. Yeah, it was painful. I don't think I could ever do that again. But 67 teams, and it was the very last team that I drafted. So literally, maybe a day or so before the season started. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I think Dan, didn't Austin say? Was it Austin that said the same thing? I think it was the last one he drafted. Yeah. He wasn't going to do it, and it ended up winning.
People ask how many teams should you draft, and you're like, I don't know until you.
I never bothered to count.
7 that year. The year before,
they always say that 67th time is the charm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah. I mean, Austin was the same sort of thing. He, he won the playoff challenge last year.
Yeah.
And so he had a ton of money going into the year. So it was, COVID, and you got a little bit of extra cash to play with, and all of a sudden it's like the leagues start adding up.
Exactly. I got to hide some of that from Uncle Sam. So
that's right.
There you go.
Just leave it on account.
Yeah, that's a savvy move. If you end up winning the grand prize, get as many credits as you can. The likelihood of you not playing the next year is very low.
Yeah, there you go.
I for somehow misunderstood because I've been a little distracted, and I put out a tweet earlier today, and it said, I don't know if you caught it, but it said $1.5 million winner, and the guys were like, "Dude, you're gonna get him in trouble with the IRS. You better take that down."
I said, we better take it down. We should knock on the door.
Yeah.
We should have called you the 750,000 credit winner, maybe.
Exactly.
IOUs. Alex owes you some IOUs.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. And then also we do have one other question that came in offline, but I've just got to ask it. One of our good friends was wondering why it was that you stopped at 68 or 67, since that's not divisible by 3, and and how could you pass up the chance for 69?
You asked the question now.
Anonymous.
Yes.
To be quite frank, I love drafting. I literally love to draft. I mean, I'm in a group chat with a lot of the my co-hosts, and they'll tell me that they're entering a draft, and my immediate response is send me the board, or send me, send me picks along the way. I want to look at as many boards as I can. I don't know. It's call it, me being an addict, a degenerate, whatever you want to call it. I love to draft. So, for me, I think usually I for the most part, I'm drafting in pockets. So if news drops and I feel like it may affect someone's ADP, and I feel like I can take advantage of that, then I'm going to draft. And I may do X amount of drafts before I feel like I've been able to take advantage of, whatever has shifted. So I think at one point, probably 2 or 3 weeks before that draft, I told myself I was done because 60 teams is ridiculous. I'm sure some news dropped and I was like, okay, I got to get in another draft. I got to get in another draft. So, and that was also, at the time when I was also doing, a few main event teams. I think I had like 4 or 5 main event teams from last year. And so I was like, news drops. Maybe I can take advantage of a little bit of shift here or there. There was also a lot of new and fresh blood that comes in towards the right at the beginning of the season. Not that they aren't experienced or that they aren't good drafters, but they're drafting differently. And so when you draft with the same group of guys, I mean, everyone kind of knows everyone's tendencies, and some of your teams just all start to look the same. And, so ideally, you want to change it up a tad bit if you can.
And when you're doing this many drafts, do you find that you have a large portfolio of players, or do you find yourself drafting a lot of the same guys, repeatedly, especially when it comes to the later rounds?
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, it's hard to have some variance or to diversify in the first few rounds, because if you're drafting the number one, I'm just going to take CMC. I'm not going to even think twice. I know I've seen Kelsey and Cook go at 1 overall, but my thought is, well, with the amount of drafts that I do, eventually I'm going to get the second and third pick. So if I don't take CMC now, then the odds that I'm going to get him later are low. So I try to those first few rounds for the most part. I mean, there are a handful of guys that I avoid, but I'm really drafting based on ADP. There's, I have my personal rankings, and then I have, the ADP rankings, and then I try to play the game of, okay, how much value can I get? But as far as trying to diversify, for the most part, I mean, I have the guys that I like, and I try to stick with that. I do have tiers, so I do try to try to draft within, my tiers, and there are certain guys that just, they need to drop 2 or 3 rounds before I find value in them. So, yeah, a lot of my teams look alike right now. There are, definitely a number of players that I am very high on as far as ownership, that, I'm maybe 60 to 50%, and in some cases, I think 70 to 80%.
Can I ask you just real quick, when you're talking about your tiers, because I find people do ranks and tiers differently. Some guys will do forecasts, and then they'll base their ranks, on that, and then they'll create tiers. Or are you literally just going like, I want these guys, this group of guys versus this group of guys? Or how are you creating those ranks, if you don't mind?
No, absolutely. So this is, I don't even want to put this out on the airways.
The America doesn't set until July. Yeah. You can speak freely in June.
No, it's not even. So the backstory behind this is my co-host Theo, Dr. Adesai. We've had this like long running discussion about projections. He is not a guy that believes in projections from a number standpoint. Thinks the idea of us projecting, said player to score 300 points is just, idiotic to some degrees. Okay. And at some point he's probably gonna, say that I described this completely wrong, but I'd like to have, some degree of reference. And I'm not putting together my own projections. Usually I, look at a few different sites, and then I just take in a number of different variables. And then somehow I create this ranking in my mind. And really what it comes down to is when I'm drafting, say I'm drafting, 8th overall. And I think, the consensus may have Jonathan Taylor 5th or 6th. But I get to 8th, the 8th pick falls on me, and by the time I draft, Jonathan Taylor is there. So he's somewhat of a value. If I don't feel comfortable clicking that button, then now I know that Jonathan Taylor is not my, 8th overall pick. And so I may slide to someone like Zeke. And at first I thought, okay, maybe that's just sort of, a gut feeling type thing. But I think it's a lot more than that. I think for all of us, it's a lot more than that. I think we have these initial rankings that are just baked, or they're set in stone or baked into, the ADP. But there are a lot of different variables that come into play. Was there a change of scenery? Was there a change in the OC? Did we get an improvement in the offensive line? Change in quarterback? Is this player aging? And all these different variables come into play to eventually get you to a point where said player at said ADP becomes a value and falls into a certain tier. And that's how I approach it. So kind of circling back, maybe projections don't really matter all that much. It's like a chicken or egg thing. Mm-hmm. For me to say, okay, I have CMC as my number 1 overall. I don't need to look at numbers. I don't need to look at touches. I don't need to look at his prior, fantasy production from like a number standpoint. But those things are always going to match up, because I think if you watch enough football and you play enough fantasy football, you know that CMC is really at times lapping the field. And then now what comes into play? Okay, well, he was injured last year, and I'm not accounting for the injury so much, but what we didn't get was an entire year within that Joe Brady offense. Okay. We also have a new quarterback coming into play. Okay. And so, is Arnold a check down quarterback in this particular offense? So it's a new quarterback in a new offense with a new running back. We also drafted a wide receiver. We have Robbie Anderson, second year there. Robbie Anderson has some history with Arnold. So there's there's all these variables that kind of go through your mind, and eventually you settle in on the player. And so I've taken all those variables, the positive and the negatives, And I can still say, okay, even with all those things accounted for, CMC is still by far my number one. And that's how I approach each player. And it's that process of drafting that allows me to really home in and lock in on whether or not I feel comfortable taking a CeeDee Lamb in the early third round versus me maybe wanting to wait until the fourth round and taking someone, players that I have ahead of him that may not be the consensus pick or consensus at that ADP.
Makes sense. So when you're doing those drafts in the early rounds, do you find yourself reaching for players, trying to get players that you like? Like, say you're picking 8th and nobody fell, and you really don't like the consensus like 8, 9, 10, 11 ADP. Will you just go ahead and reach up to what is consensus ADP, the 12th or 13th player because you like them better? Or are you looking to diversify in that first round and I need to take a little bit of players I don't like?
That's a tough question. I think there's a lot of it's kind of a complex question for me, because I could look at it from a draft build standpoint. Most of my drafts are ideally starting off running back. Mm-hmm. So for me, that back end is one large tier. I have Zeke, and then there's like a huge tier. And I'm at this current point in time, without having entering training camp and without any additional news, it's really hard to separate a lot of these players. We can make, some great arguments and create some amazing narratives on how said player can end up being a top 3 RB, but we really don't know. So I'm not necessarily trying to diversify unless I feel like there's a player that I like that I really want to get more of. And so I have no problem at that back end, because those players are all in one tier, reaching. So for instance, let's say a player that I really like is Antonio Gibson. And his ADP is falling, so I probably won't do that right now. But if his ADP rises and people are less concerned about the toe injury, and I feel like I need more teams with Antonio Gibson, well, I'm happy to take Antonio Gibson in the first round, 8 to 10 picks of 80, ahead of ADP, because I could care less about the running back that I'm getting coming back. Whereas if maybe I want to get a few more Tyreek Hill teams, I'm going to grab Tyreek Hill and grab whatever a running back falls to me. So it's more of a game where I'm trying to figure out what my roster construction is going to look like, and that's hard to figure out in the early rounds. But the last part of that is always kind of getting back to this point that I want to try to get value. So you never know what may fall to you. I think having Eckler fall that far back in the second round is tough, and I'm not seeing that very often. So, there may be a situation where I may grab Eckler, ahead of ADP, and then, hopefully, pick up someone in the second round that falls a little bit further. But it's a tough question.
Dan, it sounds like you're saying my 40% ownership of Gibson on the FFPC is 8. That's what he's saying. That sounds like he's saying. That's what I hear right there. Before I pass it back to Theo, because I know he's got a question for you. 17 weeks, does that change anything for you, regular season wise? And then maybe throw in like that week 14 bye. How does that play into your construction?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Right now, I'm not really accounting for buys, including into the championship week. I think week 14, I am, taking that into account. But as far as like the playoff weeks, I think 12 and 13 this year. For the most part, I'm largely ignoring that. It's tough because there are so many players that have buys during that given week. So if I'm avoiding, say Aaron Rodgers stays in Green Bay, it's hard. It would be hard for me to avoid all Green Bay players or Tennessee Titans. I think their buys in week 13 as well. So for the most part, I'm ignoring that. And, each league is going to be different. There are multiple ways of getting into the tournament. And that's really all we care about. Yes, it'd be nice to win first place and win the money, but really what I want is to get into the tournament. And so there are multiple ways of doing that. Either winning your league's championship or finishing, I think, first or second.
Top 2 scoring, I think it is.
Top 2 scoring, exactly. So I'm hoping that I fall into one of those categories and backdoor my way in. And then, you can play the waiver wire game, and hopefully you made some good picks in the later rounds. But outside of those who, again, if they have a bye in week 14, I'm definitely taking notice, especially if it's one of the higher picks. But the playoff weeks, for the most part, I'm ignoring those. But I do think the week 17 game adds a lot. I think, an additional game is not something that we can completely just ignore from a standpoint of injuries. So, I tend to do this year in and year out, but targeting a lot of the high price handcuffs is something that I've really focused a lot more on this year in the early drafts.
On the same team as their parent running back, or like, are you a handcuff guy? I just have to
Yeah.
out of you.
Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not.
Okay.
It totally depends on the build of the team. So I usually handcuff when I love my draft. I feel like I got 3 stud running backs, and this is all that I need. I feel like I love my wide receivers. I love my quarterback. I love my, I feel like I have a great roster. And so I'm not necessarily worried about trying to find, that diamond in the rough or that lottery ticket in that, in someone else's handcuff. I'd rather just secure my backfield. And of course, it depends on the backfield. So, if I, say I draft Kamara and I love my team at the right price, I'm going to take Latavius Murray. I think doing that with Zeke is a lot tougher because there are just too many wide receivers that I love going in the 8th and 9th round to pass on. So certain guys are too pricey, but others at the right price, I don't mind handcuffing.
Awesome.
Just saw a great tie in our chats. Do you look at strength of schedule at all, or you don't play into that? Do you play into that this time of year, like using tools or anything like that, looking down the line to try to find that magical playoff, push?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I definitely look at strength of schedule, but I use kind of the same formula that I use to create my own rankings to create my own strength of schedule. So I think when you're looking at strength of schedule, you have to be very position specific. And then there's also team specific that kind of comes into play. And I think for me, that's more when the certain quarterbacks come into play. Like, I love quarterbacks in competitive games on good offenses. So I think last year it was, I think everyone was eyeing the Atlanta Kansas City game that fell within that playoff week. So that was sort of, to me, that it's where someone like Matt Ryan and obviously, Peyton Manning, but would excel. But so, I definitely look at strength of schedule, but it's more so me, going team by team and trying to get a good sense of what each defense is going to look like. So I'm not going based off of last year's numbers. I'm not going really based off of really anyone's ranking as far as, a pass defense versus a run defense. And, and then also even within that, it can be tough. Take a player like Tyler Boyd, for instance. He may be going against what we call a tough pass defense, but he's playing slot. He's playing slot in Cincinnati with a quarterback that's coming off an ACL injury and that has, not the greatest O-line. So that's a player that I actually want, to play in that particular matchup. So it's kind of tough. So I actually go team by team, player by player, position by position to try and figure out strength of schedule. But I do take that into account. So there's a player that's playing the Washington football team twice within the playoffs. And I find it very hard to pull the trigger on him, even though I do want to buy in at the depressed ADP. And that's, I believe, Miles Sanders. So.
And then I had a question. We're really seeing a lot in early drafting, and I know it's been happening in a couple of drafts that you've been in, a hyper fragility build where somebody really pounds running back over and over and over again, maybe ignores other positions, maybe waits late on tight end. We've seen this with zero running back, with zero RB builds, and it seems like it's kind of flipped around. Are you looking for mostly balanced drafts, or are you buying into this and trying to build on a strength really on one position in some of these early drafts?
I honestly don't go into a draft with any type of approach. I think, what falls to me, and I'm greedy. So I want that, I want to get somebody past their ADP. I want to get somebody at value. If we use FFPC format, we have that top tier quarterbacks. You may have Mahomes that goes in the 3rd or 4th. Usually Josh Allen follows. I'm waiting till the very back end of that tier. And I'm hoping, because I really don't even want to draft a quarterback in that 5th round, but I'm hoping that one of those guys falls to me in the 6th, and it happens. So I'd rather take that chance that one of those guys falls to me in the 6th and get that value than reach a round or so. But when it comes to the hyper fragility approach, or the whatever you want to call it, the robust RB, hyper fragility, I think for me, it's tough to do. But if you're going to do it, this is probably the year I think you can get away with it, just given how deep the wide receiver position is. There are some guys that are going in, again, the 8th, 9th, sometimes the 10th round that could end up finishing very close to, producing wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 numbers. But ideally, you want to have that one stud wide receiver. I think I find it tough to find a team that will be able to compete 3 weeks in a row without having at least one stud wide receiver. So, maybe altering that a bit where in round 2 or round 3, you grab a high-end wide receiver. Maybe if you're lucky enough, someone falls to you in round 4. And then, if you want to hammer running backs early and then rely on hitting a few wide receivers late, that's great. Because ideally, I'm starting 4 running backs because they are just going to provide me the most stable and constant fantasy production week in and week out if they're good running backs. And based on the matchups, rather than relying on wide receivers, where even the higher end wide receivers are going to have some volatility built in week to week. So,
JD,
wanted to get I'm sorry, JD.
Go ahead, man. I lose my turn. I'm on mute. It's all you, brother.
So we have a lot of Dynasty listeners, and I know I've spoken to you a little bit about this rookie class. Maybe you could share kind of your general ideas, maybe a couple players that really stand out to you, whether it's to make an impact this year or that you see having a really, really good NFL career.
Yeah, there are a few. Obviously the big name guy is Trey Sermon. It's a running back that I absolutely loved his film when I was studying him. I think the first time I actually saw him was live watching them in a playoff game, and I felt like he had everything that you wanted in a Kyle Shanahan system. I felt like he fit that system perfectly. He doesn't have the high end speed, but I felt like he had excellent burst. He gets skinny through the holes. He's very agile. So that's one guy that I was very, very high on. I think he's going to do some great things, including this year. He's one guy that I tend to, if I'm going to reach on someone, he's probably someone that I don't mind reaching on. I'm not a big fan of Travis Etienne. I understand the allure. And maybe this just, again, I'm learning when it comes to evaluating tape, but when I watch college film and I watch guys run in open space, or I watch an RPO and a guy, has, running through a 5-lane highway, yes, he's fast and explosive. Well, explosive at least to some degree, but that really doesn't move the needle much for me. And so he's one guy that I'm not necessarily super high on. His role, I think, is a bit questionable heading into 2021. I actually drafted him the other day because he fell to the 5th round. So like I said, everyone's at value. And I have to understand that, sometimes you're just going to be wrong about certain players, especially when the field is very high on him, and him being the first or the second running back off the board. And then as far as the wide receiver class, take your pick. What an amazing wide receiver class. Every time I go down the list of, I would choose a new wide receiver to kind of go back and I'm just like what is going, was such an amazing class. But if I had to kind of pick one that maybe I guess doesn't get a lot of love, Rondale Moore. I don't give a lot of comps, and I hate to compare players to other players, but I got Tyreek Hill vibes watching this guy. I really did, and it has nothing to do with his size. When you're playing video games and you have that player that's got 99 percentile across the board, and he's just always wide open. He's so much faster than everyone else. That's what I saw when I watched Rondale Moore college tape. His separation and just the amount of respect that defensive backs gave him, falling into, being in that Arizona system with Kyler Murray as his quarterback, he's one guy that, I don't know what he's going to do this year. I will definitely have a few shares, but he's someone that I'm like very excited on. And in fact, if he were on my team, I would find as many ways to manufacture him touches as possible, including lining up in the backfield. So I could see some, I don't know, maybe he gets creative, but them drafting him, I think, more affects the running backs on that team and Chase Edmonds in my mind than it does some of the wide receivers, just because of how he can be used. So I think that could really open up that Arizona offense, because I really do think that they want to go to a very, a traditional spread offense. And I don't think that Cliff's had the personnel that he's really wanted to be able to do that. Kyler going into his third year, feeling a little bit more comfortable, having DeAndre Hopkins there. I actually think the AJ Green signing is helpful for them, especially if Fitzgerald doesn't return, having a good veteran that can, just get to where he needs to be. But yeah, the Rondale Moore additions, I think could really have that offense just explode this year if Kyler advances as a quarterback.
And then your thoughts on Kyle, who's just a meteor right now in FFPC drafts. He goes higher and higher every single draft.
Yeah, I like Cal Pitts' tape. What I saw, he's obviously very athletic. He's got great hands. But what I saw was just a red zone beast. So when I didn't really change my ADP or my ranking of him when after the Julio trade for the most part, because I felt like for Atlanta he was really going to be that red zone guy, because they don't really have anyone else. I think their offensive line is mediocre or average, maybe just a bit above average, at least where I have them. But they don't have a workhorse running back or someone who's just going to really just line up at the goal line and be a strong threat. I love Mike Davis, but I don't necessarily know that he's that guy. And I love Calvin Ridley, but I think Kyle Pitts in the red zone is where the money's going to be. I know he's going to be moved around the offense. Split out wide, moved around the formation, but he's still coming into his first year. I find it hard to draft him before the fourth round, even in a tight end premium. He fell to me, I think, once, and I think I took him at the back end of the third round because, again, using that same idea of, okay, well, maybe I would have taken Allen Robinson here and Terry McLaurin still on the board. I'm going to get one of those guys on the way back. Let me get my one share of Kyle Pitts while his ADP is depressed, and then I'll get whoever falls. So I took him at the end of the third round once, but for me, the price is just too high. I won't fault anybody who takes him or who believes in the talent. It's one of those situations where there's too many unknown variables for me to have a really good sense of whether or not he's going to live up to the capability. Because if you want to, whether you want to use all-time great tight ends as comps or all-time great wide receivers like Calvin Johnson as comps, coming into the league your first year is a challenge for most. So Calvin Johnson wouldn't have been worthy of a second-round pick his first year in the league either. So I'm off of him for this year. Obviously, for Dynasty, he's obviously elite at the top of the board.
And one rookie sleeper I wanted to ask you about, because I know you guys are talking about him on 1st and 15, Jacob Harris.
Yeah, that's more Deo's guy.
Okay.
That's more Deo's guy. But, it's funny. And if you have, it's nice having that relationship, someone who's as passionate about fantasy football and about football as you are, to be able to bounce ideas off of, especially when someone thinks so differently from you. And I think that's why we complement each other so well. Many of the players that I was on or ended up being on were a direct result of him putting me on, so the Jacob Harris comp, it's going to be tough for Jacob Harris. He's a rookie, but he is a wide receiver converter. I don't know how they're going to use him. That offense, to me, there's a lot of question marks, because I don't know if this is a situation where Sean McVay is maybe not the genius that we thought he was, or maybe he had a quarterback where he couldn't really open up the offense. Is this still a wide receiver driven offense? One of my highest owned guys, I probably shouldn't say this.
You got to spill it now.
Yeah. But I love Robert Wood. So, and early on, which is why I was drafting early on, I was getting him in the 5th round. I was like, every time, click is just automatic. But so it's hard to see, if he's going to make a true impact. But he goes, he's going late in tight end premium. Why not? Someone with that athletic build, someone that they can easily split out. And in my mind, again, he could just take the Everett role. And if he's more athletic, better hands, and if Higbee's, maybe, gets hurt or what have you, maybe he does, sort of kind of take over. These guys come out of nowhere all the time. That one's a little bit tougher, but it is someone I think he initially brought up as, potential sleeper. He's a strong dynasty guy. So for him, it was mostly dynasty, but definitely someone that gave us a little bit of pause as far as, okay, how high should we be on Tyler Higbee? Because I think we were all thinking, Everett's gone. Tyler Higbee's getting all of that. Well, that may not necessarily be the case. And it could be some other tight end too. Sometimes offenses don't necessarily change, even though volume is vacated. But yeah. And so and when he put me on the Logan Thomas last year, I had the same reaction. I was like, Logan Thomas? I was like, who? Like, had to go not to Google who is Logan Thomas? And of course, Logan Thomas ended up being on the winning team. So I've learned to not laugh and mock his picks because oftentimes, whether it's Logan Thomas or Darren Waller or Mark Andrews, he's pretty good at picking tight ends. So he says Jacob Harris. At least at the very note, just have him in the back of your mind and be quick to pick him off the waivers if he starts coming out with or more positive news continues to come out.
Dan, before you go to our listener Dave's question here, because I think that's where you're going, we'll do a quick one today because let's face it, we're talking FFPC this whole show. Guys, if you don't know it yet, myffpc.com, that's where the madness happens. That's where you make wife-changing money like our boy Abib did over here, winning $250,000 750 Genos. Guys, think about how much your wife will love fantasy football after you bring home that goodness. Come on. myffpc.com, every format. Take your home game winnings to the next level and see what you got. And real quick, Viridian Global, for that goat gear, go check it out. ViridianGlobal.com/collections/goat gear. I'm going to go back. I got a million more questions. I don't know about you guys. I got so many more questions. Dan, I'll go to you first because you threw Dave's question back on the screen. I may have threw it on prematurely, but I think this is a good one to start getting into a bit more specifics.
Okay, yeah. So do you have a must-have or a don't-want list or anything like that? I know that Nelson Sousa. Oh.
Was that you, Dan?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. We lost the guest for a second here. We'll get him back on in no time.
But in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about Dynasty Depot and fantastic site that is. If you haven't been there and you like playing Dynasty leagues, you like it doesn't matter what kind of team you like, whether you like taking over orphans and rebuilding, whether you like getting a surefire winner. Whatever kind of team you're looking for, you're going to be able to find it on the Dynasty Depot. Maybe you want to just get a team at a huge discount and rebuild it completely. You could certainly do that. I took a team, it was in a $250 league. I bought it for $50. I made 5 trades and I sold it off 3 weeks later for $200. It was basically the easiest money in the world. I had it in my possession for 2-3 weeks, made the trades and put it right back on the market and waited for it to sell. So, any way that you want to go about it. I also bought another $50 team, made a couple 3 trades, decided I like this team really well. I want to hang on to it. So you can do that too. So any way that you want to play it, you can certainly find what you're looking for on the Dynasty Depot.
Abib, Dan is so profesh. He just jumped right into a plug for a friend. Our boy Nelson's going to be so happy that your internet cut out there. Hey, at least the sun is shining on you, man. When you came on earlier, you had some rain, a storm. That's good, man. It's a good sign.
I thought it was an ominous sign. Yeah.
All right, so we'll try again. Do you have a must-have or a don't-want list? I mean, like Nelson Sousa famously has his do not draft list and his target guys. Do you do the same thing or not really?
No, there are definitely some guys that I just have 0 shares of. But again, at the right price, I'm going to draft them. if I'm looking, at the first, in the first round as far as rankings and ADP, I don't have any Jonathan Taylor. So not that I'm like super low on the guy, but there are other players that I would rather have, in that round. So he's probably a guy I'll have very low ownership of. I drafted my first Devontae Adams share and did not feel good about it. So I probably won't have many Devontae Adams.
Where'd you get him? Do you remember where you got him?
I got him. I believe I was drafting out of the 5 spot, I want to say. So it's probably like the 207 or so,
Okay.
Mid to late second round. But I figured I was like, you know what, get one share and then we'll leave it at that. But yeah, so there are certain guys that I'm not high on. I think I drafted, David Montgomery for the first time. It was like the back end of the 4th round. I didn't feel good about it, so I probably won't have any more of him as well. So there's definitely players that I'm not high on based off of where they're going. So it's not that I don't like the player and I don't think that they could be helpful for my fantasy team. It's just that I think I can get better value at that particular spot. There are definitely players that I try to target or players that I tend to be higher on. And those later rounds are when I tend to, now I'm reaching past ADP because I feel like their actual value, or at least my perceived value of them, is well ahead of where they're going, well ahead of where I end up taking them. So I try to, load up on those players as early and as often as possible before news comes out. One example of that was Antonio Brown. Early on, he was going in the double-digit rounds, and I think at the time he was not signed, and all the word coming out of Tampa Bay was that he was likely going to get signed. And I think he's also had an injury or had surgery recently. So I think people were gun shy to pull the trigger, or just, he was more so of an afterthought. And of course, news drops. He gets signed, he's looking great, or surgery went well, and that's when ADP spikes. And if I can probably give a tip to anyone, just understand that news is going to happen. Good news is going to happen and bad news is going to happen on pretty much every single player and or situation. So if you have a guy that you like, but you feel he's a little slightly higher than ADP, then just wait a little bit until the news drops. I mean, some news you can almost anticipate is going to happen. I can tell you right now, like I don't want to draft Jonathan Taylor right now, but I guarantee you when training camp starts, there's probably going to be news that Nyheim Hines looks great.
Or Mac.
Yeah, or exactly. They're going to say Mac is looking great. He's coming off his Achilles. He looks rejuvenated. He's got this fire. And then, of course, the head coaching staff and the OC, they always talk great about their players, especially their veteran players. So they're going to say, oh, yeah, we're getting everybody involved. You can never have enough running backs. Jonathan Taylor will definitely, be the workhorse, but of course we're going to mix in Mac and Hines and who else is there? I mean, so they're going to, and that's when people are going to say, oh, is this a running back by committee? And, and start, being concerned when really nothing about that situation has changed. So I'll wait. And then we may see him fall into the second when people feel less comfortable about taking him in the first and kind of go from there. So like I said, sometimes you just want to play on the news.
Makes sense. So you've looked at a lot of draft boards. You've done, a good number of drafts. What spots do you think are the premium spots to build a team from right now? Are there places, are there particular, like the 1 hole or the 10 hole or whatever, that you just really find you can do some good builds that you're very happy with?
Currently, I would say the 1 hole. We're seeing some RBs starting to fall. I think with the rise of Ridley and Kyle Pitts in the FFPC format, it's pushing some guys further down the boards. That tends to be running backs. So that 1 spot, if I could start CMC and 2 other running backs, or CMC and a running back and a stud wide receiver 1, I mean, that's just ideal. That's an ideal start. I like the idea of starting off Kelsey, and so typically that requires the 3 spot. But sometimes maybe he falls, to 4, less likely 5. But it allows you to be able to construct your team in so many different ways. I feel like I have so much more freedom when I can just get Kelsey and then completely forget the tight end position. So The 3 spot is a spot that I like, and then I also love the mid range, or basically from 5 to 7 or so, because I feel like I can take advantage of one of my guys that I'm higher on right now, given his depressed ADP, which is DeAndre Swift. So, we get back to how you like, what's your preferred draft build? I like RB. I just feel safer that way. People are always, I think, astonished or surprised when I say I like a safe and balanced build. That's how most of my teams are. I'm not someone who's like trying to draft a bunch of, what people call high upside players. I feel like every player has an upside. You can literally pick a player on the board, throw a dart, and go through their game logs and find a week where they score 25 plus points. So the upside, to me, I care more about a higher floor and consistency than I do, trying to get a player to guess that his upside week is going to be, weeks 14 through 16 when it really matters.
Does stacking play a factor in any way, in any format when you're drafting, just stacking guys on similar or on the same offenses, whether it's, receiver with 2 receivers with their quarterback, tight end quarterback, whatever your preference is?
Yeah, I love how you phrase that question, because there's offenses that I want to stack from like a season long standpoint, and I can figure out how I want to play that when we get to the those championship weeks, because sometimes ideally you're not wanting to play a running back with a wide receiver. But if I feel like an offense is significantly undervalued, I want that entire offense on my team. I'm okay if my running back doesn't score 2 touchdowns that week. My running back scores a touchdown, wide receiver scores a touchdown, my quarterback throws 2 to 3 touchdowns and picks up some yardage. Like that's my ideal week. So there's certain offenses that I'm higher on this year that I think are at a very decent price. So I'll stack that particular offense. But when it comes to the quarterback wide receiver stack, if I do it, it's going to be at value. I'm never going to reach for it. So if I draft Amari Cooper in the 4th round, I'm not drafting Dak in the 5th. I'm going to wait until the 6th, possibly 7th. And honestly, it's not a big priority for me. But if I draft, DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler sitting there in the 6th round, then I'll probably try my best to get Kyler on that team, because it just makes sense. So I definitely understand the thought behind it. But I do try to avoid drafting multiple, either wide receiver and tight end or 2 wide receivers on a given team, as far from a stack perspective. I think, to me, that's pushing it a little bit more than I like.
Did either of the overall winning teams have any quarterback, tight end, quarterback, wide receiver combos when on those championship weeks?
Yeah, I believe the 2019 team did not. That was a year that, like I guess many others, I was very high on Lamar. So most of my teams had Lamar that year, but I didn't really stack him with anyone. I don't think I had Mark Andrews on that team. I believe it was a Tyler Higbee team. And as we know, he went off towards the end of that year. And then last year, it was a stack. And Josh Allen was my Lamar Miller of last year, so I had him on a large amount of teams. And Diggs was just a great value. I got him in the 6th round in that draft, and it made sense. And so by doing that, it allowed me to, have players that excelled, in rounds 1 through 5, minus James Conner, of course.
So when you drafted your winning entries, did they really feel like special drafts, or did they just feel like just another team to start with?
It felt just another team.
I was going to say that it's like the one you hated the most, because sometimes like, I hated that team and it won.
Yeah, no. They felt I usually leave a draft feeling like I really like this team. And that's the majority of my drafts, because we're drafting our team. We're drafting players that we want for the most part. But I would probably say about 10% of drafts I leave, and I just think to myself that, like, I did not perform very well in that draft. Maybe I reached on someone. Maybe I made a bad error when it came to roster construction. There's some strong weaknesses, maybe at the running back position. And I just try to adjust for the next draft. And that's where, getting back to a point we made earlier, it's really only through doing a number of drafts where you really start to get a good feel for what you can do. Because I do want to be greedy. I do want to try and, see how far I can wait maybe on QB or tight end. But sometimes you can get a little bit too greedy and put yourself in a bad spot.
And what's your general approach to the waiver wire? Do you like to spend a lot of fab early and try to get that one guy that might last the entire season? Or are you very selective with the fab that you spend? Or is it kind of league by league?
It's definitely team dependent. And sometimes it's also, how high am I on a player? How much confidence do I have in them? So, for instance, once we got on to Logan Thomas last year, we tried to pick him up in basically every league we were in. And even though in the back of my mind, I knew people weren't necessarily familiar with Logan Thomas or really weren't interested in putting a waiver in before the season started, I spent, probably a decent amount of fab just trying to make sure that I got him on my team because we had a fair level of confidence that he was going to be able to perform or help us out in the tight end premium league. But then you get to someone like Mike Davis, and it's really team specific. And I actually had a lot of Mike Davis because in my mind, he was the clear handcuff and he was the cheapest handcuff. So I love that. There are certain guys that are just like, they're no different than, handcuff being taken, 8 to 9 rounds earlier. We're all hoping, or not hoping, but we're all, drafting these players in anticipation that someone ahead of them is going to get hurt, but we don't know who's going to get hurt. So Mike Davis is someone I had on a lot of teams, but on teams where I didn't have him and I needed the wide, that running back help. Yeah, I spent, anywhere from 70 to 80% of my fab to get that running back early on. And on teams where I didn't need him as much, I would, scale that back a bit, but I would still spend a good 50%. So I don't mind spending all my fab early on. Sometimes it comes back and kills you because if you end up in a situation where you don't have any fab, you can't add or drop players. And so if your kicker, gets cut, you don't have any fab, you're just stuck with zero at the kicker spot.
Well, we do have to touch on that. Do you feel like it's fair that the FFPC requires you to draft a kicker?
Absolutely. I've been trying to get them to change that rule for the last 3 years.
Good answer.
Yeah, they won't do it. Yeah, but that's the real answer to do kickers matter? No, apparently they don't.
Guys, before I take a bit macro level, I'm a little embarrassed. I did not mean to do that. We're about an hour in, and I haven't mentioned, guys, just like if you like what Abib's sharing here, let's face it, he's sharing the goodness right now. Smash the like button, smash the subscribe. That's like a free way for you guys to say you appreciate what's going on at the GOAT District. You appreciate the goodness that our man Abib is dropping tonight. So just grab that mouse, little like action. I'm gonna kind of zoom out a bit, Abib. You won some serious money playing this game that we all love. What's changed the most? What's the pre-Abib versus this post-winning Abib? Maybe one thing that stands out with regards to your approach to fantasy.
Honestly, not much has changed. If I'm being quite frank, those winnings, I don't even think about them. Even the trophies themselves. I'm really on to winning 2021. That's literally all I have my sights set on. I think last year I went in thinking I had a really, really good chance of winning, and we all do, or else we wouldn't be drafting. But I felt like the process from in 2020 and how comfortable I was with certain guys and draft bills was something that I felt was going to be able to put me in contention. And I'm feeling, the same way this year. So, the odds are definitely obviously are against me, but that's not going to stop me from trying. So, not much has changed. I think, before I started the process, I was thinking to myself, I was like, you know what, maybe I won't play as much this year.
We all do that.
Hey, good luck with that.
Hang back, Theo's texting me about, ex-college player and how he's going to, off the charts athleticism. I'm like, okay, sure. We're not, but then draft day hit and I don't know what happened. It was like, a flip switch. And I was just like, all right, let's go. Let's get it. So, I'm still very much all about the process. I'm very, I'm dug in and I'm ready to go. I love this. I mean, what else could I ask for? To be able to talk fantasy football, play a game that we love, watch a game that we love, and share it with other people who have the same passion. I mean, I feel very, very fortunate. So.
I was going to go one more macro kind of question, but our buddies over at Fantasy Data, I mean, they dropped some serious goodness. Go check out their YouTube channel. We got our buddy Muzio coming on the Goat District very, very soon. #Shark Week. Let's bring our attention to his question. He's looking at
Let's not answer any of Muzio. We know what he's trying to do. We know what he's trying to do. Don't answer any of his questions.
Sure.
Notice we let JD try to slide this one in since he's not in the hard way draft.
You know what? I'll answer it, but he's just not going to know if it's a real answer or not. Take it how you will. How you will.
Hey, I'm on the sidelines with actually Todd's in the draft too. I'll be on the sidelines on Friday, but I tried to sneak it in. If you got a little late round action for our listeners.
Very, very sharp answer. Very, very, very sharp right there. You talk about like the sleeper running back Christian McCaffrey or something like that at the top.
What was his question?
Just looking at late rounds.
Round 15 through 20 sleepers. And why?
Okay. I'll give him one. How about that?
That's very, very generous.
I'll give him one. Actually, let me pull up the draft real quick. I think I have a draft board up. So I don't want to just give a generic answer because I know I'm going to hear about it from him.
Guys, go check out Fantasy Data, man. They got some serious tools, no matter whether you're an analyst, a player, and just some really good content on their YouTube channel.
All right, I'm going to give him 2. Okay, I'll give him 2. So Muzio, don't say I never did anything for you. When I come asking for questions, asking for you to be on the 1st and 15th pod, I want to hear nothing but yeses. Okay. The first is Samaje Perine. Okay. Just because he goes very, very late in drafts, and I think people think there's a lot of ambiguity in that backfield behind Joe Mixon. I feel like there's less ambiguity. I feel like he performed very well towards the end of last year. The one knock on Mixon is that, he has trouble staying healthy. So Samaje Perine is almost a free pick at the end of drafts if you're looking for a lottery ticket. And then the last, this is courtesy of Theo, Malcolm Brown with the Miami Dolphins. Okay. People are going to hear this and I felt the same way. He threw out the name Malcolm Brown. I was like, I don't want that Jag on my team, but he has a way of mentioning a player and it just festers in your mind. And a week later, you look back and you're like, damn it, he makes sense. So they brought him in during free agency. We're talking about how Miami's not really bringing in other backs and we're bringing up Gaskins. And yes, maybe Gaskins gets the majority of the work. I mean, but they also brought in, Howard last year. They didn't give him any run, but they brought him in. I oftentimes see Salvin Ahmed being drafted ahead of Malcolm Brown, but to bring in a veteran, pay him the money that he paid them, this team is, potentially could make a huge step forward on the offensive end. They have weapons that are really going to force people to prevent them from loading the box, not necessarily that they were loading the box for Gaskin, but it's really going to open things even more so for the running backs. Malcolm Brown could be a sneaky player where he could get, a significant amount of touches. You could easily see him getting the goal line work. And he's always been sort of kind of a decent third down back, someone who can kind of come in and pass protect and maybe pick up a few easy catches here or there. So he's maybe not a guy that's going to win you your league per se, but like I said, anybody can have any given week. They can have, I'm sure if I go through Malcolm Brown's game log, I'll find one where he scored 2 touchdowns and 80 yards or something like that. But he may be a guy where okay, you're struggling at running back. You went wide receiver heavy, 0 RB, and you just need somebody to get you through until you find someone or two, one of your handcuffs hits, he may be that perfect guy. We talked about David Johnson on the podcast as another guy like that, but Malcolm Brown goes undrafted in many leagues, and he goes super late, so that may be a guy. I think Deo's texting me right now. Don't talk about Malcolm Brown, so sorry.
You heard it here.
Thank you, Deo.
Malcolm Brown and Samaje Perine. I think Sigmund Bloom's a guy that's the second time I hear that name today with Perine, and it's true. Behind Mixon, there's nobody there. Let's face it, right? So
he's my highest owned player. Him and one other guy. There's one other guy.
And let's face it. I mean, when's the last time that Joe Mixon failed to disappoint us in some way? So.
I don't know, but I'm buying in. I'm a sucker for Mixon.
And then, without giving us the player, have you identified a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen type quarterback that you're going to go with this year, or is that something that develops as the summer moves on?
Yeah, we talked about this on the pod. I really think this year is very different than years past. Before you were in a situation where there were only so many elite and top tier QBs, so maybe only a handful, 3 or 4, and you could deal with other teams in your league not having one of those higher end QBs and either play the waiver wire or wait late and draft 2, maybe 3 in certain cases to really hit at that position. This year there are a lot more, in my opinion. And to not have one of those elite guys or to miss on one of those guys, I think could really, really hurt you. I look back to some of my teams last year that did poorly. And the main reason for a good majority of those teams was because I had Matt Ryan on those teams. And he started off the year very, very poorly. And he sunk a lot of those teams. These high-stake leagues are tough because you only have X amount of time in the regular season to really try and put yourself in position to make that final tournament or make the playoffs. So, answer your question. I love a lot of quarterbacks. I love that top tier. I'm happy taking Dak at the end of that tier. I like the upside with Jalen Hurts, and it's easy to couple him with, a safer, higher floor quarterback like Brady. Trey Lance is someone I'm trying to get on as many teams as possible. I've talked about. I don't want to reach for him, but he's kind of that Konami code type quarterback that may come in super late. I like Tua's potential upside with the receiving options that he has. Another year in the system, a new offense that's supposedly being opened up, and the offensive weapons that he has at his disposal. I like ending drafts where I've missed on QBs, I missed on the top end guys, and maybe I'm stuck with someone like a Stafford who could still perform, but with the Rams defense and being, and not really running, his upside is capped to some degrees. That's why he goes as late as he goes. Or even a Tom Brady. I love ending a draft with like a Taysom Hill type. If he doesn't start, okay, I cut him. But if he does start, I mean, if we get word that he's the starting quarterback in New Orleans, I guarantee his ADP is going to reach the level of, someone like a Tannehill who's on a meteoric rise with the addition of Julio. So there are a lot of QBs that I love. So it's probably one of those positions where I think I'm more comfortable waiting because I feel very comfortable with how I can piecemeal that position later on or with the guys that are going later on that may offer me as much upside.
I'm going to go one more macro, and then you guys each, if you have one last question for our boy who's been extremely generous. Guys, smash the like. You're not going to find goodness like this from anybody coming close to just taking home the goodness. I mean, guys, 750 Genos is no joke, especially when you're playing fantasy. I'm going to go real macro, Abib. A day in the life. It's anyone who's successful. I think you kind of, as you get older, you realize you want to learn from guys who have done it, who have been there. So now, especially off season, I think during the season it's like we're all kind of chasing our tails. But right now we're in June. What's a day in the life fantasy wise? What are things that you're doing right now that maybe someone watching can maybe add to whether it's their toolkit or kind of their daily activities to get better in their own leagues?
Oh man, Twitter is amazing. There's so much information, so many amazing analysts and experts that are willing to share their opinion, many of which have websites that are well worth the subscription. And just taking in as much information as possible. I think it's important to try and hear as many viewpoints as possible, and then to hopefully get to a point where you can do some form of like a critical appraisal of all this information that you bring in, and hopefully make the right decision based off of that. So I can, I try to listen to as many pods as I can. I try to talk to friends like Theo and co-host Chris about certain ideas. We probably text 50 times a day about said player because you may think you're high on someone, but if you have someone who's pushing against that or providing resistance and really sort of kind of assessing how, much confidence you had in said player.
Truth.
Yeah, truth. It really helps you out along the way. So, at this stage, I would say just try and take in as much information as possible. Try and follow as many people on Twitter as possible. Try to do a deep dive into the analysis. If you're not sure about a certain player and you're wondering, okay, everyone seems to be high on a player and you just don't get it, go back and watch the film. I think, NFL does usually, at some point in the off season, they offer free viewing to go back and watch some of the games. But I think if you're really interested, it's well worth just subscribing and going back and watching some of the old footage from last year, especially with how certain teams ended. Last 4 or 5 games, I think, are always important as well. And that'll give you a good sense. There's nothing that can substitute actually putting an eye on a player in a said situation and seeing how they perform. It's one reason why, you asked earlier, are there guys that, you don't draft? Last year, that guy was Todd Gurley, because I watched a lot of Rams games and I saw, how much explosion was gone. And it was a guy that I knew that I just wasn't going to feel comfortable starting, nor did I feel comfortable that he was going to be able to finish the season. And I would not have gotten that without physically looking and watching that game. The stats sometimes tell a different story than what our eyes and what our, watching the game will.
Our boy Andrew's asking, go check out, if you subscribe to the channel, you get it, 500,000 Billies, right? We talk about FFPC big tournaments like the ones that our guest tonight has won. Andrew's asking those onesie positions, like let's say defense, are you kind of scattering your ownership percentage, or are you kind of focusing on the same, maybe similar defenses, handful of defenses that you've kind of picked out? How do you approach those onesies?
Yeah, there are a handful of defenses that I'm higher on. I don't necessarily, defense and kicker are really the last thing that I think about when it comes to drafting. If there's a player that I know I want to get in a certain draft and I'm fairly confident he's going to go undrafted, then maybe, okay, I don't have any Pittsburgh Steelers. Maybe I grab the Pittsburgh Steelers if they fall late. But those rounds 15, 16, 17, I'm not, I'm unlikely taking a defense or kicker in those rounds. I think that's something that's changed from prior years where before maybe, my depth of knowledge into those later rounds wasn't as strong as it is now. But I look in the later rounds and I just see so many potential hidden gems. So for me, I want to say there are at least 12 defenses, because usually when I end a draft, whatever defense is left, I feel very, very comfortable drafting. And it's not necessarily, based on the ADP, but, some defenses, for instance, Denver, it's a defense that I'm fairly high on this year. And I also like to see how they're starting the year off. So a defense that I can easily cut 2 to 3 weeks into a season, I'm happy taking in the later rounds with a good matchup.
I can't believe you gave away my Denver defense secret already.
I know. Trust me. I didn't want to do it. In air quotes, okay? I understand, like, the players that we say that we're high on and that, like, we think are our sleepers, we know that, like, 70% of the fantasy community is also high on it. It's like, keeping it to themselves. So, I say it, half jokingly, but, yeah, that Denver defense, I didn't want to give up. But, for the listeners.
There you go.
This has been awesome, Abib. Like our boy Ty says from the True North, just great conversation tonight and ton of value. And we appreciate you sharing with us tonight and hanging with us. Remind the people, the new pod, all this goodness, guys, you can find it on Abib's pod. Remind the people where they can find that and any of your goodness out there in social media land.
Yeah, so the new pod and show is called First and 15th. We are on Twitter, so you can follow us at First and 15th. You can follow myself, Skywalker 2000. Our pod is on Spotify, First and 15th, Apple, First and 15th, as well as YouTube. We really encourage our listeners to try and check out the YouTube version. We think it gives a better sense of what we're hoping to achieve, which is really the deep dive into approaches and conversation and how we mentally approach this fantasy football season of 2020, and how we think about drafting, how we think about analyzing players. So it's an opportunity for us to really dive deep into discussions where I think on other formats, you only have so much time. So we try to do things that other podcasts probably don't have enough time for because they have to get out so much news and stats and things of that nature. So hopefully it's a good listen, a good watch for you guys. We appreciate anyone who listens and subscribes as well.
Yeah, guys, we'll add the link. I'll add the link to the show comments once we get off this thing. But again, Abib, appreciate you for hanging with us tonight and all the gems that you've shared. Theo, that harpoon, man, just bringing in the whales, the sharks, you name it, you're bringing in the goodness. So, dude, we appreciate everything you're bringing in the district. Remind the people what you have going on, because I know you've got a bunch of stuff going on. Wow. What am I thinking about? Breakout Finder. Wow. Any of your good.
I have some new stuff. Yeah. So I have some articles coming out on Breakout Finder and also on Player Pro. This draft kit dropped, and I did the Titans and the Falcons preview, which I'm pretty excited about. And I have a couple of player previews as well. So you can find me on Twitter, and you can find me here in the GOAT District. And yeah, this was just awesome with Abib. We really enjoyed having you on. This was really a pleasure, and we hope you can come back on sometime.
Dan,
absolutely.
I know you came without some flow, but you brought a different flow tonight as usual. I think our guest brought the biggest flow, but remind the peeps where your goodness is, because you're the overhyped sleeper, man. You're, as I say, the underhyped sleeper in our books. So remind the peeps and any wise words before we shut it down.
Yeah, so just continue to keep following the GOAT District podcast. I mean, we've got, this is Shark Week. Abib did a great job of kicking it off for us. I've thoroughly enjoyed this entire time. I mean, I can't believe that we're past an hour and 20 already. It felt like about 20 minutes to me. So, definitely come enjoy the goodness. Go check out Abib's show as well, First and 15. And just make sure that you're following the right people during this time of year. I thought one of the things that Abib said, get out there on Twitter and keep your ears open, keep your mind open. That's one of the things I really enjoy doing, is taking in a lot of information. I don't agree with all of it, for sure. But just taking in information. And when I disagree with somebody, I think it's valuable to just ask yourself, why do I disagree with this person? Is there a possibility that they're seeing something I'm not? Am I seeing something they're not? What's going on here? And that's how you make yourself a better player. So I really appreciate Abib saying that. It definitely reinforces one of the things I think is very, very important about what your process is.
Agreed, man. I think a big part of it is processing, like be open to a lot of different sources, be selective as to where you're getting the sources. But I think the ones that are the most successful are the ones that can process all that information and just use it in the right ways. And whether that's trading, building, drafting, guys, I can't even quantify the amount of goodness you got tonight. So make sure you smash the like, make sure you smash the subscribe, go follow Skywalker 2000, the man who brought home the wife-changing money. He is showing you the way, guys. He's showing you the Jedi powers in fantasy, and that's what he brought tonight. So we appreciate him. I always appreciate hanging with Theo and Dan, just a couple of savages out there in the fantasy land, and you know, we're lucky enough to get their insight on the weekly. Guys, be safe out there, be good, keep drafting. It's Shark Week, man. If you're not tuning in, you ain't gonna win, and I know you like to win, so be there for Shark Week, guys. We'll check you all later.
District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text. That trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.